For what felt like hours, Kofi and Eleanor zigzagged through the wilderness, using every ounce of strength to evade capture. Finally, they stumbled upon a cluster of shacks belonging to farmers who worked the land during the day. Exhausted and out of options, Kofi knocked frantically on one of the doors. An elderly man answered, his expression wary until Kofi explained their plight. Moved by their desperation, the farmer allowed them to hide inside his modest home. As dawn broke, Kofi realized they couldn't run forever. With Eleanor's help, he decided to contact not just local authorities, but also international news outlets. Eleanor used her connections as a journalist to send urgent messages to colleagues abroad, exposing the kidnapping ring and calling for intervention. Within hours, the story gained traction, drawing attention from both local law enforcement and foreign governments. By the time the kidnappers realized their operation was compromised, it was too late. Armed officers descended on the warehouse, arresting the criminals and dismantling their network. Eleanor was finally safe, but the ordeal had left its mark on both her and Kofi. As they sat together in the farmer's hut, waiting for transport arranged by Eleanor's embassy, she looked at Kofi with gratitude shining in her eyes. "You saved me," she said softly, "but I think you've changed your own life too." Kofi smiled faintly, unsure of what the future held. What he did know was that courage, even in the smallest doses, could move mountains, and he had proven that himself. The sun was setting over the sprawling city, casting long shadows across its crowded streets. Kofi tightened his grip on the handlebars of his battered bicycle, weaving through the chaos of honking cars, shouting vendors, and pedestrians rushing to get home before nightfall. His uniform, a faded blue shirt with patches stitched hastily, was damp from sweat, but he didn't mind. This was life as he knew it, hard, relentless, yet filled with small moments of hope. Kofi lived in a tiny room tucked away in one of the poorer neighborhoods, where electricity flickered unpredictably and water had to be fetched from a communal tap. Despite the hardships, he carried himself with quiet dignity. At just 22 years old, he bore responsibilities far beyond his age. His mother, frail and often bedridden due to illness, depended entirely on him. Every day, Kofi woke up at dawn, ate a quick meal of stale bread if there was any left, and set out into the city to deliver packages for a courier company. The pay wasn't much, but it kept them alive. Today had been particularly grueling. The rain that had started mid-morning hadn't let up, drenching him completely. His bag, slung diagonally across his chest, felt heavier than usual, stuffed with parcels wrapped in plastic to protect them from the downpour. Still, Kofi pedaled tirelessly, his legs aching but refusing to give in. Each delivery brought him closer to earning enough to buy medicine for his mother. That thought alone kept him going. As the evening deepened, the streets grew quieter, though not entirely empty. Streetlights buzzed faintly, their glow barely cutting through the gloom. Kofi checked his watch. It was almost time to head back. But something caught his attention as he passed an alleyway near an abandoned warehouse. A muffled sound, like someone trying to scream but unable to fully voice their fear, reached his ears. For a moment, he hesitated. Curiosity tugged at him, but so did caution. These parts of the city were notorious for danger. Gangs roamed freely, and no one dared intervene unless they wanted trouble. But Kofi couldn't shake off the feeling that someone needed help. Taking a deep breath, he steered his bike toward the narrow passage, his heart pounding. The darkness swallowed him whole as he ventured deeper, the sound growing clearer now. It was definitely a cry for help. Peering around a pile of discarded crates, he saw her, a woman huddled against the cold brick wall, trembling uncontrollably. Her clothes, though elegant, were torn and muddy, and her face was streaked with dirt and tears. She looked terrified, her wide eyes darting around as if expecting someone, or something, to appear out of nowhere. For a split second, Kofi questioned what he should do. He could turn around, leave this stranger behind, and focus on surviving another day. After all, he had his own struggles to deal with. But then he remembered his mother's words. "Kindness costs nothing, my son." Those words echoed in his mind, urging him to act. Swallowing his fear, Kofi stepped forward, his voice soft but steady. "Are you okay? Do you need help?" The woman flinched at first, startled by his presence. But when she saw his gentle expression and realized he meant no harm, she nodded weakly. In that moment, Kofi made a decision that would change both their lives forever. Little did he know, this simple act of compassion would lead him down a path full of challenges, sacrifices, and ultimately, transformation. The fragile peace that had settled over Kofi's home was shattered the following evening. As dusk fell, a group of men appeared in the neighborhood, their presence unmistakable. They moved with purpose, their eyes scanning every face and doorway as they demanded information about Eleanor. Word spread quickly among the residents. Danger had arrived. Kofi watched from behind a crack in the wooden shutters, his heart pounding like a drum. The leader of the group, a tall man with a scar running down his cheek, barked orders to his companions while clutching a photograph of Eleanor. It was clear they were desperate to find her. Fear gripped Kofi's chest, but he forced himself to stay calm. He couldn't let them see his panic or hear any sound from inside the house. Turning back to Eleanor, who sat huddled on the floor beside his mother, Kofi whispered urgently, "They're here. We need to leave. Now." Eleanor's face turned pale, her hands trembling as she clutched the edges of her borrowed dress. "Where will we go?" she asked, her voice barely audible. "There's nowhere safe." Kofi hesitated, his mind racing. She was right. The kidnappers knew this area well, and staying put would only lead to disaster. But leaving meant risking exposure in the open streets. Still, doing nothing wasn't an option. Taking a deep breath, he crouched beside her. "Trust me," he said firmly. "I'll get you out of this." With careful precision, Kofi devised a plan. He gathered a scarf and wrapped it around Eleanor's head, covering most of her face to disguise her identity. Then he slipped on his courier uniform, hoping it would make him appear less suspicious if they were stopped. His mother handed him a small bag containing water and snacks, pressing it into his hands with a worried smile. "Be careful, my son," she murmured. "God is with you." Under the cover of darkness, Kofi led Eleanor out through the back door, avoiding the main road where the kidnappers lingered. The narrow alleys between houses provided some concealment, but every step felt like walking on thin ice. At one point, they heard voices approaching, a pair of men arguing loudly, and ducked behind a pile of discarded crates. Eleanor pressed herself against the wall, her breathing shallow, while Kofi peered cautiously around the corner. When the coast was clear, they bolted forward, their footsteps muffled by the damp ground. Their escape route took them toward the outskirts of the city, where fewer people ventured after dark. Kofi knew a small, abandoned bus stop there. It wasn't much, but it offered temporary refuge. Once they reached it, Eleanor collapsed onto the bench, her body shaking with exhaustion. "I can't keep running," she admitted, tears streaming down her face. "What if they catch us?" "They won't," Kofi assured her, though doubt gnawed at him. He couldn't afford to lose hope, not when Eleanor was counting on him. Pulling out a crumpled piece of paper from his pocket, he scribbled a note detailing everything they knew about the kidnappers, their descriptions, the location of the warehouse, and the fact that they were still searching for Eleanor. He folded the note carefully and handed it to her. "If anything happens to me, take this and find someone trustworthy to deliver it to the police. Promise me." Eleanor stared at him, her eyes wide with fear and admiration. "Nothing's going to happen to you," she insisted, her voice steadier now. "We're getting through this together." But danger wasn't done with them yet. Just as Kofi stood to scout the area, headlights pierced the darkness, illuminating the bus stop. A car screeched to a halt nearby, and 3 men stepped out, their silhouettes menacing against the glow of the vehicle's lamps. One of them pointed directly at Eleanor. "There she is." Kofi reacted instantly, grabbing Eleanor's hand and pulling her to her feet. "Run!" he shouted, dragging her into the shadows. They darted through the underbrush, branches clawing at their skin as they fled blindly into the night. Behind them, the men gave chase, their shouts echoing through the empty fields. The woman's shaking hands clutched at the edge of her torn coat as Kofi knelt beside her, his face etched with concern. She looked up at him, her eyes filled with a mixture of fear and relief. "Please," she whispered hoarsely, her voice barely audible over the distant hum of the city. "They're going to come back for me." Kofi's heart raced as he tried to make sense of her words. Who were they? And why was this woman, clearly out of place in this grimy corner of the city, so terrified? Despite his own fears, he couldn't ignore the desperation in her voice. He reached out cautiously, offering her his hand. "Come with me," he said softly. "You'll be safe." She hesitated for a moment, her gaze darting toward the mouth of the alleyway, as if expecting someone to appear. Then, with trembling fingers, she took his hand. Kofi helped her to her feet, noticing how unsteady she was. Her elegant shoes, now scuffed and caked with mud, were clearly not meant for running or hiding. Yet here she was, fighting to survive. As they stepped into the dim light of the street, Kofi got a better look at her. She was strikingly beautiful, with fair skin that stood out starkly against the grime on her face. Her hair, though damp and tangled, framed her delicate features. But it wasn't just her appearance that caught his attention. It was the strength in her eyes, even amidst her terror. This woman had endured something terrible, and yet she hadn't given up. "My name is Eleanor," she managed to say between shaky breaths. I'm from abroad. I came here to write about the people, the struggles." Her voice trailed off, and she swallowed hard, as if the memories were too painful to recount. Kofi nodded slowly, piecing together fragments of her story. Foreigners didn't often venture into this part of the city unless they had a specific purpose. Journalists sometimes visited to document poverty or corruption, but their presence usually stirred trouble. It seemed Eleanor had stumbled into something far more dangerous than she'd anticipated. "They took me," she continued, her voice trembling. "Men. They said they wanted money. My family. They're wealthy, but I don't know what happened. They left me here after I escaped." She paused, tears streaming down her cheeks. "I don't even know where I am anymore." Kofi felt a pang of sympathy. This woman, who likely lived a life of comfort and privilege, had been thrust into a nightmare. He couldn't imagine the fear she must have felt, trapped in a foreign land with no one to turn to. And yet, despite everything, she still clung to hope. "You're safe now," Kofi reassured her, though he wasn't entirely sure those words were true. The men who had taken her could return at any moment. Still, he knew he had to act quickly. "We need to move. Can you walk?" Eleanor nodded weakly, leaning on Kofi for support. Together, they moved cautiously through the shadows, avoiding open spaces where they might be spotted. Kofi kept glancing over his shoulder, his senses on high alert. Every noise, the rustle of leaves, the distant bark of a dog, sent a jolt of panic through him. But he forced himself to stay calm, knowing that Eleanor depended on him. As they navigated the labyrinthine streets, Kofi couldn't help but marvel at the strange twist of fate that had brought them together. Just hours ago, he'd been an ordinary courier, struggling to make ends meet. Now he found himself protecting a stranger whose world was worlds apart from his own. Despite their differences, there was a connection forming between them, a quiet understanding born out of shared vulnerability. "Thank you," Eleanor murmured suddenly, breaking the silence. Her voice was soft but sincere. "For helping me. Most people wouldn't have stopped." Kofi glanced at her, surprised by her gratitude. In his mind, he hadn't done anything extraordinary. Helping someone in need was simply the right thing to do. "Don't thank me yet," he replied with a small smile. "We're not out of danger." But deep down, he felt a flicker of pride. For the first time in a long while, he felt like he was making a difference, not just for himself or his mother, but for someone else. Little did he know, This act of kindness would ripple outward, changing not only Eleanor's life, but also his own in ways he could never have imagined. Decades passed, and Kofi's name became synonymous with resilience, compassion, and transformation. What had started as a single act of kindness on a rainy night blossomed into a legacy that touched countless lives. Streets once plagued by despair now thrived with activity. Small businesses flourished, schools welcomed eager students, and parks buzzed with laughter. The change was palpable, and at the heart of it all stood Kofi, a man who had dared to dream beyond his circumstances. Kofi's logistics company wasn't just successful, it was revolutionary. It employed thousands, many of whom came from backgrounds similar to his own. Employees weren't just given jobs, they were offered training programs, mentorship opportunities, and pathways to grow. Some went on to start their own ventures, inspired by Kofi's example. Others stayed within the company, rising through the ranks and becoming leaders in their own right. Every success story added another brick to the foundation Kofi had built, a foundation rooted in hope and humanity. But Kofi's impact extended far beyond business. His partnership with Eleanor led to the creation of numerous initiatives aimed at addressing systemic issues like poverty, education gaps, and healthcare access. Together, they established scholarships for underprivileged youth, funded community centers, and supported grassroots movements advocating for social justice. Their collaboration became a beacon of what could be achieved when privilege met purpose, and when two worlds united for a common cause. As Kofi grew older, he began writing a memoir with Eleanor's help. Titled From Darkness to Dawn, the book chronicled their journey. From the night they met in that dark alleyway to the global impact of their combined efforts. The memoir wasn't just about Kofi or Eleanor. It was about the power of ordinary people doing extraordinary things. Each chapter highlighted stories of individuals whose lives had been transformed because someone chose to care. Readers around the world were moved by its message, and the book quickly became a bestseller. Eleanor often visited during those years, her friendship with Kofi enduring the test of time. Though her hair had turned silver and his steps had slowed, their bond remained as strong as ever. They would sit together under the shade of a tree in Kofi's garden, reminiscing about the past and marveling at how much had changed. "Do you remember that night?" Eleanor asked one day, her eyes twinkling with nostalgia. "I was so scared, but somehow, I knew you'd save me." "And I didn't know then that saving you would save me too," Kofi replied with a chuckle. Funny how life works. Their shared experiences inspired them to travel the world, speaking at conferences and universities about the importance of empathy, courage, and collaboration. Audiences listened intently, hanging onto every word as Kofi recounted his struggles and triumphs. He always ended his speeches with the same message: never underestimate the ripple effect of kindness. One small action can change everything. For you, for others, for the world. When Kofi finally retired, handing over the reins of his company to trusted colleagues, he did so knowing his work would continue. The values he instilled in his team ensured that the organization would remain a force for good long after he stepped aside. Retirement gave him more time to spend with his mother, now frail but still full of wisdom, and to mentor young entrepreneurs eager to follow in his footsteps. Years later, when Kofi passed away peacefully in his sleep, the entire city mourned. Flags flew at half-mast, and thousands gathered to celebrate his life. Eleanor delivered the eulogy, her voice steady despite her grief. "Kofi taught us that no matter where we come from, we have the power to shape our destiny," she said. "He showed us that kindness isn't just an act, it's a way of life. And he reminded us that even in the darkest moments, there is always light if we're willing to look for it." Today, statues of Kofi stand in public squares, murals depict his journey on walls across the city, and schools bear his name. But perhaps his greatest legacy lies not in monuments or accolades, but in the countless lives he touched. From the young courier navigating chaotic streets to the woman cowering in fear in a dark alley, Kofi proved that everyone has the potential to make a difference. if only they choose to act. And so, the story of Kofi and Eleanor serves as a timeless reminder. Even the smallest acts of courage and compassion can alter destinies, bridging divides, and lighting the path toward a brighter future. The rain had stopped, but the air remained heavy with moisture, clinging to their skin as Kofi and Eleanor moved silently through the darkened streets. Every step felt like a gamble, every shadow a potential threat. Kofi's mind raced as he tried to anticipate what might come next. He knew the kidnappers wouldn't give up easily, not when there was money involved. They'd be searching for Eleanor, and if they found her with him, neither of them would make it out alive. "Stay close," Kofi whispered, his voice barely audible. Eleanor nodded, gripping his arm tightly as they slipped into a narrow alleyway. The path was slick with mud, and the uneven ground made walking difficult, especially for someone in Eleanor's condition. Her elegant shoes were no match for the rough terrain, and she stumbled more than once, each time clutching Kofi to steady herself. Despite her struggles, Eleanor didn't complain. She seemed determined to keep moving, her fear outweighing her discomfort. Kofi admired her resilience, though he could see the toll this ordeal was taking on her. Her face was pale, her lips pressed into a thin line as she fought back tears. He wanted to tell her everything would be okay, but he didn't want to lie. Not yet. Kofi led them through a maze of back streets and hidden passageways, routes he'd memorized over years of navigating the city as a courier. These shortcuts were rarely used by outsiders, making them safer, at least for now. Still, danger lurked around every corner. At one point, a car sped past, its headlights cutting through the darkness. Both Kofi and Eleanor froze, pressing themselves against the damp wall until the vehicle disappeared from sight. "They're looking for me," Eleanor murmured, her voice trembling. "They'll stop at nothing." Kofi glanced at her, his expression grim. "Then we won't let them find you," he said firmly. His words carried a confidence he didn't entirely feel, but he knew he had to stay strong, for both their sakes. As they continued, Kofi noticed Eleanor struggling to keep up. Her breathing grew labored, and her steps became slower. Realizing she needed a moment to rest, he guided her to a secluded spot behind a stack of crates. "Wait here," he instructed. "I'll check ahead." Eleanor grabbed his wrist before he could leave. "No, don't go," she pleaded, her wide eyes reflecting panic. "Please, I can't do this alone." Kofi hesitated, torn between caution and compassion. Finally, he crouched beside her, placing a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "I'm not leaving you," he promised. "But we have to be smart. If we stay still too long, they'll catch us." Reluctantly, Eleanor released his arm, nodding weakly. Kofi scanned the area quickly, ensuring the coast was clear before returning to her side. "We're almost there," he lied, hoping to ease her anxiety. In truth, he wasn't sure where there even was. All he knew was that they couldn't stop, not until they were far away from this part of the city. Minutes later, they'd reached a busy intersection, the glow of neon signs casting colorful reflections on puddles. Kofi hesitated, knowing they'd be more visible here. But staying in the shadows meant risking capture. With a deep breath, he stepped onto the street, pulling Eleanor along with him. They blended into the sparse crowd of late-night pedestrians, keeping their heads down as they crossed to the other side. Just as they thought they were safe, a group of men emerged from a nearby bar, their loud laughter echoing through the night. One of them glanced in their direction, his gaze lingering suspiciously. Kofi's heart sank. Had they been spotted? Without hesitation, he pulled Eleanor into a narrow doorway, shielding her body with his own. They stood motionless, holding their breaths, until the men finally walked away. When the coast was clear, Eleanor looked up at Kofi, her eyes filled with gratitude. And something else, admiration. "You're incredible," she whispered. "I don't know how to thank you." Kofi shook his head, brushing off the compliment. "Let's just focus on getting you somewhere safe," he replied. But inside, he felt a spark of pride. This woman, who came from a world so different from his, trusted him completely. And though he didn't fully understand why, he knew he couldn't let her down. With renewed determination, they pressed on, inching closer to safety with every step. Kofi's heart pounded with a mix of fear and hope. He didn't know what lay ahead, but one thing was certain. He was ready to face whatever came their way. The days that followed Eleanor's rescue were a whirlwind of activity, but for Kofi, they marked the beginning of something extraordinary. Once news of the kidnapping and the subsequent arrest of the criminals spread, Eleanor became determined to repay Kofi's bravery in a way that would change his life forever. It wasn't just about gratitude. It was about ensuring that someone like Kofi, who had risked everything to do the right thing, wouldn't have to struggle anymore. Eleanor reached out to her family and connections back home, sharing Kofi's story with passion and conviction. Her father, a wealthy businessman with a philanthropic streak, listened intently as she recounted how this young man had not only saved her life, but also stood up against injustice, despite the odds stacked against him. Moved by Kofi's courage, he agreed to fund a scholarship program aimed at helping underprivileged youth access education, a cause close to Eleanor's heart. When Eleanor broke the news to Kofi, his initial reaction was disbelief. "A scholarship? For me?" he asked, shaking his head. "I'm just a courier. I don't even know if I'm smart enough." "You're smarter than you think," Eleanor replied firmly, her eyes shining with determination. "And you've already proven that you have what it takes to lead. Trust me, Kofi, you deserve this chance." With Eleanor's encouragement, Kofi applied for the scholarship and was accepted into a prestigious university. The program covered tuition, books, and living expenses, allowing him to focus entirely on his studies without worrying about money. For the first time in his life, he felt hope, not just for himself, but for his mother, whose health slowly improved thanks to better care made possible by the financial relief. At university, Kofi thrived. He chose to study business management, driven by a desire to create opportunities for others like him. His professors were impressed by his sharp mind and unwavering work ethic. Classmates admired his humility and resilience, often turning to him for advice or inspiration. Though he sometimes felt out of place among students from more privileged backgrounds, he reminded himself why he was there: to build a better future, not just for himself, but for his community. Meanwhile, Eleanor stayed in touch, visiting whenever her work brought her back to the region. Their friendship deepened over time, rooted in mutual respect and shared experiences. She introduced Kofi to influential figures in journalism, business, and activism, opening doors he never imagined existed. Through these connections, Kofi began to envision a dream: a logistics company that would prioritize ethical practices while creating jobs for people in underserved areas. As graduation approached, Kofi poured his energy into turning that dream into reality. With support from Eleanor's family foundation, he secured funding to launch his company. It started small, with just a handful of employees and a few delivery vans, but Kofi's vision was clear: to transform the courier industry by empowering those who had been overlooked. He hired workers from marginalized communities, offering them fair wages, training programs, and opportunities for growth. Many of his recruits came from neighborhoods similar to his own, where unemployment rates were high and hope was scarce. Word of Kofi's initiative spread quickly, earning praise from both local leaders and international organizations. People admired not only his business acumen but also his commitment to giving back. His mother, now healthier and proud beyond measure, often visited the office, marveling at how far her son had come since those difficult days when survival seemed impossible. For Eleanor, seeing Kofi succeed was deeply fulfilling. She continued her advocacy work, partnering with him on projects that bridged gaps between privilege and poverty. Together, they organized workshops, fundraisers, and awareness campaigns, inspiring countless others to believe in the power of kindness and perseverance. By the time Kofi graduated top of his class, he had already built a solid foundation for his company. As he stood on stage to receive his diploma, applause ringing in his ears. He couldn't help but reflect on the journey that had brought him here. From the rainy night, he found Eleanor cowering in an alleyway to the moment he walked across the stage as a graduate. Every step had been guided by courage, compassion, and an unshakable belief in the possibility of change. Looking out at the crowd, Kofi spotted Eleanor sitting in the front row, beaming with pride. Beside her sat his mother, tears streaming down her face as she clapped enthusiastically. In that moment, Kofi realized that saving Eleanor hadn't just changed her fate. It had ignited a chain reaction of transformation that touched everyone around him. And this was only the beginning. Years passed, and Kofi's company grew into something far greater than he had ever imagined. What began as a small operation with just a few vans and employees soon expanded into a thriving enterprise known for its ethical practices and community-focused mission. Streets that were once dominated by gangs and crime now buzzed with the activity of honest workers earning their livelihoods. Kofi's dream of creating opportunities for others was becoming a reality, one delivery route at a time. Every morning, Kofi arrived at his office early, sipping a cup of strong tea while reviewing reports and meeting with his team. His leadership style was unique. He didn't see himself as above anyone else, but rather as part of a collective effort to uplift their community. He made it a point to visit each branch regularly, speaking directly with drivers, warehouse staff, and managers. Employees admired him not just because he paid them well, but because he genuinely cared about their lives. Many said working for Kofi felt less like a job and more like being part of a family. One day, as Kofi walked through the bustling hub of his main distribution center, he paused to chat with a young man named Quaim, who had recently joined the team. Quaim reminded Kofi of himself, ambitious, hardworking, and eager to prove himself despite coming from a difficult background. "You're doing great work," Kofi told him with a warm smile. "Keep pushing forward. This is just the beginning." Quaim nodded, gratitude shining in his eyes. "Thank you, sir. I don't know where I'd be without this chance." Kofi patted him on the shoulder. "Exactly where I was before someone gave me a shot. That's why we're here, to help each other rise." Back at home, Kofi's mother watched all these changes with quiet pride. The frail woman who had once worried endlessly about her son's future now sat comfortably in her chair, knitting blankets for newborn babies in the neighborhood. Her health had improved significantly thanks to the stability Kofi provided, and she spent her days volunteering at a local community center. She often joked that Kofi had become too important to spend much time at home. But deep down, she knew how much he still valued their bond. On weekends, they cooked meals together, sharing stories and laughter over plates of steaming food. Meanwhile, Eleanor continued to play an integral role in Kofi's journey. Though her career took her around the world, she remained deeply connected to the projects they had started together. She collaborated with Kofi on initiatives aimed at improving education and healthcare in underserved areas, using her platform as a journalist to amplify their impact. Together, they organized events that brought global attention to issues affecting marginalized communities, inspiring others to take action. One such event, a gala held in a grand hotel, was attended by dignitaries, business leaders, and activists from across the globe. As Kofi stood at the podium delivering a speech, he looked out at the sea of faces and felt a surge of emotion. "When I first met Eleanor years ago, I never imagined our paths would lead us here," he began, his voice steady yet filled with passion. "But that night taught me something invaluable. No act of kindness is too small, and no dream is too big if we believe in ourselves and each other." The room erupted in applause, and Eleanor, seated near the front, wiped away tears. She approached him afterward, wrapping him in a tight hug. "You've come so far, Kofi," she said softly. "I'm so proud of you." As the years went by, Kofi's influence extended beyond business. He became a symbol of hope and resilience, proof that even those born into poverty could rise above their circumstances with determination and support. Local schools invited him to speak to students, encouraging them to pursue their dreams, no matter how impossible they seemed. Community centers named awards after him, honoring individuals who demonstrated exceptional courage and compassion. Yet despite all his success, Kofi remained grounded. He often visited the neighborhood where he grew up, ensuring that his roots stayed firmly planted in the soil of humility. On one such visit, he stopped by the tiny house he had once called home. It had been renovated slightly, thanks to funds he quietly donated, but its essence remained unchanged. Standing there, he reflected on the boy he used to be, the one who cycled tirelessly through rain and shine, dreaming of a better tomorrow. That evening, as he sat under the stars with his mother, Kofi realized how far they had both come. Life hadn't been easy, but every challenge had shaped him into the person he was today. And though the road ahead would undoubtedly bring new obstacles, he faced them with confidence, knowing he wasn't alone. With Eleanor by his side and a community standing behind him, Kofi knew anything was possible. After what felt like an eternity of walking, Kofi finally guided Eleanor to the modest neighborhood where he lived. The streets here were quieter, lined with small houses and makeshift homes that stood shoulder to shoulder. Flickering streetlights cast uneven shadows on the cracked pavement, but there was a sense of familiarity in the air. This was Kofi's world, a place where people looked out for one another despite their hardships. Eleanor hesitated as they approached Kofi's home, a tiny one-room house tucked away at the end of a narrow lane. It wasn't much, a single window, a wooden door slightly warped from years of use, and walls that bore patches of peeling paint. But it was safe. For now, that was all that mattered. "This is where you live?" Eleanor asked softly, her voice tinged with surprise. She didn't mean to sound judgmental. It was just so different from anything she'd ever experienced. Her own life had been filled with spacious rooms, polished furniture, and comforts she rarely thought twice about. But standing here, in front of this humble dwelling, she realized how sheltered her existence had been. "It's not much," Kofi admitted with a sheepish smile, "but it's home." He pushed open the door, ushering her inside. The room was dimly lit by a kerosene lamp, its soft glow revealing a simple bed, a small table stacked with books, and a few chairs. On one corner sat a pot of boiling water, likely meant for tea or cooking. Despite its size, the space felt warm and welcoming, thanks in part to the presence of Kofi's mother, who lay resting on the bed. "Mama," Kofi called gently, stepping closer. His mother stirred, her frail frame shifting under the thin blanket. When she saw Kofi, her face lit up with a tired but loving smile. Then her eyes fell on Eleanor, and her expression shifted to one of concern. "Who is this, my son?" she asked, her voice weak but kind. Kofi knelt beside her, explaining quickly yet carefully. "She needs our help, Mama. Please, can we take care of her for tonight?" Without hesitation, his mother nodded. "Of course," she said, her tone firm despite her frailty. "No one should suffer alone." Eleanor watched the exchange with tears welling in her eyes. She had never met these people before, yet they were treating her like family. Their generosity moved her deeply, especially since they clearly had so little to give. As Kofi's mother instructed him to fetch clean clothes for Eleanor, she offered her a reassuring smile. "You're safe here, child. Rest." Grateful beyond words, Eleanor accepted the change of clothes, a plain dress that belonged to Kofi's mother, and freshened up as best she could. Meanwhile, Kofi prepared a cup of hot tea, adding a pinch of sugar he had saved for special occasions. He handed it to Eleanor, who wrapped her hands around the warm mug, savoring both the heat and the kindness behind the gesture. As the night wore on, Eleanor began to open up about her ordeal. She explained how she had come to the city to document stories of resilience among its poorest communities. Instead, she had attracted the wrong kind of attention. The kidnappers had targeted her because of her foreign accent and expensive belongings, assuming she came from wealth. They demanded ransom from her family abroad, but grew impatient when no payment arrived. "They didn't care about me," Eleanor said bitterly, her voice breaking. I was just a means to an end. Kofi listened intently, his jaw tightening with anger. He couldn't fathom how anyone could treat another human being so cruelly. Yet, hearing her story only strengthened his resolve to protect her. "We'll make sure they don't hurt you again," he promised. "I won't let them." The next morning, Kofi decided it was time to act. Using a neighbor's phone, a luxury he rarely afforded himself, he contacted local authorities anonymously, reporting the kidnapping and providing details about the criminals' hideout near the warehouse. He knew involving the police was risky. Corruption ran rampant in the city, and trust was hard to come by. But staying silent wasn't an option either. When he returned, Eleanor was sitting quietly beside Kofi's mother, who was sharing stories of her son's childhood. Hearing laughter in the room brought a flicker of joy to Kofi's heart, even amidst the tension. Still, he couldn't shake the feeling that danger was closing in. Word traveled fast in their community, and it wouldn't be long before the kidnappers realized Eleanor was missing, and that someone had tipped off the authorities. But for now, as the three of them shared a simple meal of bread and stew, there was a brief moment of peace. Eleanor glanced at Kofi, her gratitude shining through her weary eyes. "I'll never forget this," she said softly. "What you've done, it's changed everything." Kofi smiled, though worry lingered in his gaze. He didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but for tonight, they were safe, and sometimes that was enough.